Amy Morin in Depression Statistics That You Should Know that there are 300 million people worldwide struggling with depression. That the United States alone, 16.2 adults are diagnosed per year. The scary thing about these statistics is that they don't account for those who avoid diagnosis due to mental health stigma. Because they don't know the signs and the symptoms, and they frequently lack understanding about the treatment involved. Depression is completely treatable, but only half of those diagnosed ever receive treatment, and of those that do receive treatment, many wait months and even years. Again, according to Morin, suicide is the second leading cause of death in people aged 15 to 24, and 10th overall. How would I know this? I have depression. Do you know how long I waited to get diagnosed, or to get treatment? 7 years. I waited 7 years to get help. At first, I didn't know what was wrong with me. I fell for depression stigma and didn't think that what I had was what was wrong with me could possibly be depression. After getting diagnosed, I didn't receive sufficient help because I didn't want to seem weak, I didn't want to give up my illusion of independence, and I didn't want to be judged and seen as a bad mom. I was concerned about what people thought of me, and I didn't want people to know how broken I was. I did eventually get help. I wanted it not just for myself, but because the people that loved me showed me that I deserved to get help. Help me to remove the stigma by learning the signs, symptoms, and treatment of depression. First, let's address stigma. So what comes to mind when you think of depression? Do you fall for media portrayal of depression? Do you think that the people are obviously gloomy and negative? Are they poor pity me, I want to die people? Or do you think that they're just crazy or weird? The book, Deconstructing Stigma in Mental Health, states that stigma has 3 driving forces behind it: discrimination, ignorance, and prejudice. People are prevented from seeking help and getting treatment before they can even get diagnosed. The strength of social stigma attached to depression keeps those from getting help because they are afraid of what they might lose. Social discrimination is real. It costs people their jobs and, at worst, their lives. So be compassionate. Depression is just like any other illness. It requires treatment, just like diabetes or an injury. So what is depression? Depression is a mood disorder. Different types of depression have different underlying causes, and there are some differences in the symptoms. But overall, in order to receive a diagnosis, you need to have at least 5 of the following symptoms. These are listed by a journal article called Depression. I'll read them directly because I'm afraid of missing it. So, irritable or depressed mood for most of the day. Unintended weight loss or weight gain. Hypersomnia, which is sleeping too much, and insomnia, which is not getting enough sleep. Loss of energy or fatigue, lack of interest or pleasure in previously enjoyed activities. Feelings of excessive guilt, inadequacy, and worthlessness. Diminished concentration, indecisiveness, physical slowness or agitation, or recurring thoughts of death. The article Depression and Anxiety lists some more symptoms that are even more worrying and point to those who are at higher risk of suicide. Social isolation, sudden cheerfulness or calm after a depressive episode, exaggerated complaints about pain or aches, frequent use of alcohol or drugs, neglect of duties such as pets, finances, your house, or yourself, giving away precious mementos, or getting your affairs in order. Recent psychological trauma such as divorce or a death, a family history of suicide or talking about death and suicide, or buying a gun. I've had 2 different kinds of depression in my life. I started with postpartum depression when my second youngest was about 6 months old. I didn't recognize it for what it was. I fell for depression, or the stigmatization of depression. I assumed that in order to have postpartum depression, I needed to be crying all the time. I needed to not want to take care of my baby. So I dismissed my symptoms. I was very agitated and irritable. I had lots of fatigue and a lack of sleep, but really, I had a 6-month-old baby. I also believed that postpartum could only happen when the baby was first born. According to the article, Types of Postpartum Depression and How to Cope, it can happen up until the baby reaches a year old. My depression meant that my rational self was beating out my emotional self in 7 out of 10 battles. It was difficult because it made life chaotic and stressful, and I struggled to keep my emotional banshee in check. Down the line, my depression morphed into clinical depression, mostly because it never went away, and I started to add some of the more severe symptoms, and some of the scarier ones. When I figured out that I had postpartum depression, I sought help. I went to a doctor, I got diagnosed, and I received treatment. I learned coping strategies that helped me to manage my life, and so that things were a little less crazy. I declined medication at the time, not just because I was breastfeeding, but because I had a personal prejudice against being on medication. I believed that they were for the weak-willed, and that it was a further sign of my failure to manage my own emotions. So there are several different kinds of treatment for depression. Depression statistics everyone should know says that the most effective or successful treatment is a combination of psychotherapy or talk therapy and medication. Medication, because it addresses underlying symptoms, and psychotherapy or talk therapy because it's more of an individualized plan that gives you strategies to individually cope with your personal stresses. The article Depression and Anxiety also lists that the other main treatments are light therapy, exercise, eating healthy, getting adequate sleep, and in extreme cases, electroconvulsive therapy. So my first round of treatment was exclusively talk therapy. It worked really well for me. It gave me the skills I needed to cope, and just knowing what I had helped a lot. It didn't make me feel quite so crazy. But stigma reared its head again when my therapist asked my husband to come to one of my sessions. And he said, "It's your problem. Why can't you just be happy?" So later, I lost many of the tools that I had gained. I fell further into my depressive fog, and ultimately, it was the efforts of my husband that saved me. He could tell that things had gotten worse, and this time around, he finally realized that it wasn't something that I could control. So with the help of my husband, my mom, and my mother-in-law, I got help. I had to try a few different kinds of meditations before I found one that helped. My real aha moment was about 10 days into the final medication. I woke up happy. Let that sink in. I woke up happy. I went, wait, I thought I was happy. Dang, I forgot what happy feels like. I'm no longer on medication, but I don't regret the fact that I did it. I am now in maintenance mode. At the end of the day, the things that help me are exercise, eating regular meals, getting enough sleep, taking breaks, reading my scriptures and making attainable goals, and recognizing that my best is going to look different every single day. This time around, my husband is supportive. He works hard not to reinforce my feelings of guilt and inadequacy. He recognizes that I need breaks and gives me the space I need to sometimes collect myself. So what can you do? Help remove the negative stigmas attached to depression. Be compassionate. Take the time to learn about the signs and symptoms of depression. Remember the things that help treat it. Not just because someday you might have depression, but because someday somebody that you love might, and you might just save a life. It did mine.